The Department of Defense, A Story of Overindulgence for Mr. Mitt Romney by Ian McClellan, former Sergeant, USMC. Today's America faces many great challenges. Not to say that this is anything different than usual, for someone could argue that outside of your textbook standard definition for utopia, all societies and citizens and nations face challenges. One of America's challenges today, however, is the near immeasurable amount of debt that the nation sits in. One of the main reasons for this debt is the amount of overspending that the nation conducts every year. If we were to investigate into who are some of the biggest spenders with the most drastic difference between cost and reward, then by this definition, the Department of Defense would be the winner of this most unfortunate award. One of the numerous reasons is that we spend more on defense than we ever have since the end of World War II. However, we have the smallest Army, Air Force, and Navy that we've ever had since the end of World War II. And to make matters worse, all of our major equipment is on average older than it's ever been since the end of World War II. Restructuring the budget for the DOD is not an easy task, and for that truth is one of the main driving forces behind its consistency throughout the last 4 to 5 presidential administrations. I mention the office of president because they are our nation's quarterback. They are the only one individual that can rally the people and bring about change on a grand scale. The restructuring of the DOD budget will take a mass effort from all elected officials, but if done properly and promptly, will start to invigorate this nation with a sense of morale and pride that has gone unseen since the late 1940s and early 1950s. The position of President of the United States is quite honestly the only position that can come close to single-handedly putting an end to the overspending on the behalf of the Department of Defense. The American people are starting to become more than exhausted with the national debt and are starting to desperately ask for its end. Having a presidential candidate who is willing to step up and make the necessary and responsible changes will almost immediately become a favorite of the working class population. Since this is also the largest population of the American people, lest we not forget the non-1%, one can easily see why this topic should immediately draw the attention of any presidential candidate who not only wants to win, but more importantly, a candidate that strives to serve and represent the American people. I believe that because of the before-mentioned reasons that you, Mr. Romney, should include in your campaign for office a proposal to cut the spending of the DOD in an attempt to right the ship that is the national deficit. Traditionally, the GOP is not known for wanting to cut any funding that has to do with our nation's defense. Even though this stance can be traced back to the party icon Ronald Reagan's administration, I warn you that as Bob Dylan warned over 40 years ago, times they are a-changin'. More and more Americans who identify themselves as blue-collar and working class are finding themselves with mainly two things in common: conservative voting trends and a desire to see America come out of the seemingly inescapable amount of debt that it has fallen in. The latter has become one of, if not the strongest hot topic that will be used on this election campaign. If you have any doubts about this, then please observe the campaign strategy of your closest independent rival, Ron Paul. Even with a quick glance, you can see that the correlation between his stance on DOD policy and spending and a tremendous increase in his support since the last time he was on the campaign trail. There is more than one way to skin the proverbial cat, so in this essay you will find some proposals that will cut down on DOD spending while gaining morale among both your constituents and, most importantly, the voters in November. One of the first things that must be done is to explain to the rest of the world that our image of world police is gone. This can be seen as one of the biggest reasons as to why our DOD and nation have overreached and fallen on the overspending times that they have. The U.S. spends more money on its defense than the rest of the world combined. A quick example is how the U.S. alone has 11 aircraft carriers in their Navy, while the rest of the world has a combined total of 10. The fact that not all of these carriers are utilized in a time of war, combined with how their unit cost has grown exponentially since their production 30 years ago, it can become abundantly clear how this egotistical attitude as the biggest and baddest on the block is just as asinine for a country as it is for a 14-year-old child. The first step that could be taken would be the termination of all projects that are either redundant, underperforming, or are tied to low-priority missions. For example, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, which is a fifth-generation fighter jet that should be scrapped from all future budgets. The total expected cost is over $260 billion starting in fiscal year 2012. Yet according to the Air Force and U.S. Navy, the military's current fourth-generation fighters, the F-15, the F-16, and the F-18 Hornet, are still far superior to Chinese and Russian aircraft and are still less expensive than the F-35. Just by looking at the evidence provided, one can have a very challenging task of trying to defend why we should continue to fund the F-35 project and the many others that resemble it. So as the old adage goes, if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. And that's just as true today and applicable to military spending as it is to normal American everyday life. For far too long, this country has adopted the idea of having the latest must mean that you have the greatest. Clearly that is not true, for we have the greatest in aerospace combat technology, yet ignored in order to pay extravagantly to get something that has been unproven to be more effective. While the F-35 is an example of an underperforming program, there are programs that have been part of the armed forces for decades and have yet not been utilized in decades. An example of this would be the Marine Corps program for Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle that is designed for amphibious assault. There are two problems with the program that stand out immediately. The first is that the vehicle's performance record is questionable and that there have been no amphibious landings conducted under combat conditions in nearly half a century. The other problem to go along with the lack of applicability is that the cost per unit has increased by 177% since the year 2000 to $24 million. As you can plainly see, programs like this one are literally bleeding our country's money and resources dry. It is only a matter of time before the American people will begin finding out about where their money is going in the programs such as these. By recognizing that and forming a position in order to get in front of these issues, you can gain momentum from the working class and veteran community alike. Another avenue of approach would be to look into the research and development budget and address the issues there. While determining how much exactly should be spent on research and development is no simple task that should be taken lightly, there is still a need for a possible cutback. The R&D budget has grown nearly 60% since 2001, which may not come as a surprise. But what may is that the DOD is currently spending more money on research and development than China spends on its entire defense budget. As I previously mentioned, trying to put a number on how much we should spend on R&D can be one of the hardest and trickiest tasks to accomplish without losing support. However, if we were to cut the current amount by 20% over the next decade, we would save approximately $110 billion over that span. With the new proposed amount, our R&D spending would still be more than it ever has been since the end of World War II and during the Cold War, and more than any country in the world. So before we become quick to shun any cut in spending, we should look critically at examples such as these presented and realize that not only would my suggestions save nearly $370.24 billion over a period of 10 years, but they would also make us more focused and mission-oriented force. The reason I say this is that with the personnel attached to these projects that include, but are not limited to, maintainers, pilots, operators, human resource specialists, logistics specialists, supply support, and expediters can all be retrained and utilized in higher priority missions and operations. This will bring me to my last point on how to better spend and get the full potential out of the DoD budget. That is, use just a fraction of the money saved in the trimming of the fat of the DoD budget and use it to increase the manpower of our armed forces. By expanding the manpower, we in fact save even more money in the long run. That is because by having more men and women in the military, we will decrease the average number of times a single individual is deployed to theater during their enlistment or commission. By decreasing the number of times someone is deployed, we will be able to see a drop in suicide rates, anxiety disorder, and other conditions linked to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. PTSD-related illnesses and disease cost money for the DoD on two fronts. The first is the initial cost directly to the veteran. This can be and include medication, medical tests, and temporary suspension of duty. The other is in the disability that the veteran will be paid for the remainder of their life from the Veteran Affairs Office and the medical insurance company TRICARE. PTSD is one of the few certainties of war. The disorder has been recorded in every war that mankind has historical records for. That is why one of the best approaches in terms of both morale and cost is to decrease the odds of a service member becoming affected by it by increasing the amount of service members. Every ground-signed service member has been deployed an average of 2.5 times to theater during the current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of these deployments can last up to 18 months. So by increasing the manpower of the military, we can effectively reduce the amount of deployments every service member goes on and decrease the total time spent on said deployments. As you are well aware, if you are elected the next President of the United States of America, then your appointed staff will have to immediately begin drafting the budget for the DoD in 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year cycles. I will admit that immediate action may seem like an idea of grandeur, but this is false because there is a measure that you could take, although it may seem rather rash and be immensely unexpected. You could and should freeze the budget for the DoD. There has been no precedent set for this kind of action yet, but presidents as recently as President Obama have frozen the rest of discretionary spending before. You should demand that the Department of Defense goes back to the drawing board and address the all too real and prevalent fiscal problems from the roots up. Quite honestly, the atrocity that is the DoD's books can and should be declared a threat to national security of the utmost severity. The freeze on the DOD's budget should remain in place until a full audit of all DOD spending has been completed. This is something that requires the highest echelon of respect and responsibility from elected representatives that for too long have hid behind bureaucratic bylaws and fundamentally the word defense. People for too long have been made and bred to believe that anything with the word defense in the title and is in any way related to the entire nation is something that should be taken as its face value and require very little to no debate. In conclusion, I will say this. The DOD for too long has taken advantage of its citizens' trust and need for security by its governing body. The days when publicly elected officials go along and try not to rock the boat are over. Today's Americans are not only among the most educated in United States history, but they are also privy to the most information that in times past was held to those with only the most means and or resources. I say this to warn you that the days of having citizens that will follow in line with whatever makes them most comfortable are numbered, albeit not over. The time for a president to act and take responsibility for their citizens' wants, needs, and desires is now. There are many obstacles and issues that must be addressed, but I tell you none are more important or pertinent than that of the Department of Defense overspending. That is why you, Mr. Romney, must be the one that steps up and gives the American people what they need. This one subject and course of action will not single-handedly win the election, and that is something I am willing to admit. What I propose to you is more than just what it appears on the surface. I am not just telling you to cut and change the way the DOD spends its money. What I am proposing in a way of thought and action that is needed for our government. I am saying that what this country needs more than anything else is elected officials that use their education and previous work experiences along with their expertise to examine how this government currently runs and strive to correct it. Not just to mold it or change it into something that benefits them personally or their party, instead something that benefits us, the American citizens, more than any profit that may be turned or some majority that may be established. It may sound like a lot of work and a lot of, well, that's just not how we do business. But to that I answer with another old phrase from our childhood that is, if you can't stand the heat, then get out of the kitchen.